"There's something else that you should know," Bruder Stoltz said. "I hesitate to bring this up, but if something happens, you would perhaps always wonder, and so it might be better to say something now." Elder Thomas could feel a kind of stiffness come over all the Stoltzes. "As you know, Anna was forced to join Bund Deutscher Mädel. Now certain SS men would appear to be pursuing her." "Pursuing her? What do you mean?" Herr Stoltz's jaw tightened. "These degraded animals, Himmler's men, are being told to have all the babies they can, with their wives or with unmarried girls. They search out Germanic-looking girls, blonde, healthy young women, and they tell them that it is their duty to create babies for the Reich." Elder Thomas was too stunned to respond. Anna was looking down at her hands, which she had gripped together in her lap. "Anna has protected herself so far, and I won't let this happen to her. I'll die first, but that means one day we may suddenly be gone, and I don't know where we might go." Elder Thomas suddenly felt sick. "My husband is making the picture too dark," Sister Stoltz was quick to say. "These SS men usually don't push the girls too hard when they resist. Anna will be able to avoid them. I feel certain of it. Let's sing together, and then let's kneel and pray. Everything is going to be all right." And so they sang hymns together, and then to everyone's surprise, Brother Stoltz said the prayer himself. He asked for a blessing upon Elder Thomas, on Anna, and on all of them. He asked that somehow they could all survive Hitler's evil, that the Church could survive. "Lord, I struggle to believe anything at all," he said, "but please, let those who are good triumph over the evil men who want to rule our world." When the prayer ended, everyone stood, and they all knew that something very significant had happened. Brother Stoltz had never said the family prayer before, and he had often expressed his doubts about prayer. This was his honest effort to show faith, but it was also his gift to Elder Thomas, to show him that he was trying, that he was making progress. Elder Thomas knew that, and he walked to Brother Stoltz. He embraced the man, and Brother Stoltz accepted the affection, even wrapped his arms around Elder Thomas. Then Sister Stoltz grabbed Elder Thomas and hugged him for quite some time, patting his back and saying, "Oh, my goodness, this is so heavy for us." Peter hugged Elder Thomas too and cried, and then Anna was next. But Elder Thomas knew he had to be careful. He held his hand out to her, and she clung to it for a couple of extra seconds and then whispered, "Auf Wiedersehen." Tears were streaming down her face. Elder Thomas nodded and tried to say goodbye, but his throat had tightened, and he didn't dare speak. He walked to the door. People were saying things, offering good wishes, saying goodbye, but Elder Thomas couldn't get a word out. He took a last look around, nodded to everyone, and caught one last glimpse of Anna. She was leaning against her father, who had taken her under his arm, and in that instant he knew. He was going to get back to her, somehow, sometime. Chapter 11. When Bobby stepped in and shut the door behind her, Sister Thomas said, "You're home awfully early for a Friday night. Come here for just a minute, will you?" Bobby walked into the living room and sat down on the couch next to her mom. Sister Thomas placed a marker in her book, and she set the book on an end table. She dropped her hands to her lap and looked straight ahead. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Sure. Are you in love?" Bobby almost decided to give the right answer, but she had wanted to talk to her mother about this, and now was probably as good a time as any. "I don't know," she said. "Are you serious?" "Mom, I used to think love hit you so hard that you heard bells, and that was that. But that's never happened to me, so I don't know what to think." "How do you feel when he kisses you?" This was getting into an area that made Bobby uncomfortable. "It's okay when he kisses me," she said. "It's fine." "Bobby, people will tell you that that part is not important. But it is. It's very important. If he kisses you and holds you in his arms and you don't feel something, then this whole thing might not be right." She was blushing by now, but she added, "I'm afraid when we talk to girls at church, we make marriage sound like it's all family prayer and gospel study, but there's more to it than that." Bobby laughed. "I think the girls know on their own that they aren't hearing the whole story." Mom laughed too. "Bobby, I can't think of anything worse than marrying a man you don't love." "I know. That's what I keep thinking. She leaned back and folded her arms. Is there someone else? Bobby instantly sat up straight again. No, not really. Not really? What's that supposed to mean? Well, there's someone I wish Phil were a little more like, but he's not someone I'm interested in. Why not? He's not LDS, for one thing. Oh, Bobby. And they both knew what she meant. Don't worry, I won't let anything develop between us. But he's setting off some bells, isn't he? Bobby took a breath. Yes. Now I wish I hadn't asked. This is worse than I thought. No, it isn't. I won't let anything happen. Oh, sis, this is so hard for me. Phil could make bells clang for me. I just don't see the problem. Maybe you ought to marry him. Maybe so. Or LaRue could. We're both nuts over him. Bobby got up. She looked down at her mom and smiled. Dad better get some of the old fire back or he'll lose you. Don't worry about your father. He's got plenty of fire. Really? But Mom was blushing again, and Bobby knew that she was too. It was time to head upstairs. On the following morning, Saturday, Sister Thomas got up almost as early as she did on weekdays. President Thomas was already downstairs in his office doing some sort of church business, but he would want his breakfast soon. Once Sister Thomas had the bacon and eggs on, she gave a little knock on her husband's office door. "I'll be right there," he answered, and in another couple of minutes he pushed his way through the swinging door and into the kitchen. "Who's up?" he wanted to know. "No one," Mom answered. "No one in this whole town. You're the only man I know who wants his breakfast at 6:30 on Saturday." "Half the day is gone," he said, but he was grinning. He sat down at the kitchen table, which was set only for him. "Aren't you eating?" "I will eat a little later, when the kids are up." Sister Thomas sat down at the table. "Al, I need to talk to you about something. I had a little chat with Bobby last night. I asked her why she didn't show more excitement about getting married, and she admitted that she's not sure she's in love with Phil." "That's nonsense. What's not to love about the boy?" He shoved a big chunk of fried egg into his mouth decisively. Sister Thomas knew she was on thin ice with her husband. She didn't want him to go crashing up the stairs to wake Bobby. "Love isn't quite that simple, Al. You know that." "I'll tell you something, B." The president set his fork down. "This is the kind of silliness we let young people get away with these days. My grandfather Thomas walked across a pasture to the next farm and told my grandmother he wanted to marry her. She hardly knew him, but he was an honest man from a good family. She accepted, and that was that. That's how people did it in those days, and they had good marriages, too." "You're right, Al. I'm glad I didn't marry for love. I just took the first offer that came along." President Thomas began to smile. "You were nuts over me, admit it," he said. "And shouldn't Bobby be nuts over the man she marries?" "Yes, definitely. She should be nuts over Phil Clark." Sister Thomas knew that her husband was being ironic, but she also knew what he expected. "Well, maybe she was just feeling blue last night. I don't know. But we need to back her up, whatever she decides." "No. I think that's exactly the wrong thing to do. She's found a good man, and she needs to go forward and not look back." "Al, young people these days are different from our grandparents. They think for themselves, whether we like it or not. And Bobby is about as independent as any girl I know." "You say that like you admire her for it. Maybe she would be better off if she listened a little more and didn't get her back up the way she does." President Thomas looked down at the table, and when he looked back up, his wife saw his concern. "I know I overrate my own wisdom," he said, "and I know the kids have to think for themselves. But I see them walking right off cliffs sometimes, and the minute I say, 'Take a look where you're heading,' they act like I want to hog-tie them to the back porch." "Oh, come on. Alex has never come close to a cliff in his life, and Bobby is wise beyond her years. I notice you didn't mention Wally. He's just young." President Thomas thought about that for a time. "You're right about Alex. He'll listen. But the boy would rather think than do. I don't know how to get him to be more practical. Life will take care of that. Well, maybe, in time. But he might have to learn some hard lessons, and Bobby will too. But it's Wally right now who worries me sick. He's told me already that he doesn't want to go on a mission, and I'm afraid if he did go, he'd quit the first time it got a little hard. We just need to be patient with him. He'll be all right." "I hope so. But I don't see any sign of it yet. And I worry about the other kids, too. Gene is a good boy, easier to deal with than most of our kids, but the only thing he really cares about is sports. And LaRue's 10 years old and already has a mouth on her." "I worry more about Bev," Sister Thomas said. "She lives too much in LaRue's shadow. She doesn't know how to speak up for herself." President Thomas shook his head. "I had no idea raising kids would be like this," he said. "I thought all I had to do was teach them the truth and they would follow. President Thomas pushed his plate away, even though there was another slice of toast on it. "I'll tell you the worst part, B. This business of being a parent in Zion is going to get harder. Things are changing way too fast around here." Sister Thomas sometimes grew weary of her husband's lectures on the problems in Zion, but she felt his honest concern now. She reached across the table and took hold of his hand. Chapter 12. It was one of those perfect April evenings in Utah when spring is trying one last time to muscle winter aside. Wally was on his first date with Lorraine Gardner. Wally had taken Lorraine to the lavish new Center Theater downtown, and they had seen The Story of Vernon and Irene Castle with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. The last few weeks had been hard for Wally. East High had lost its track meet to South, and Wally knew he might have made the difference. The guys on the team were furious about it. Wally had heard most of the complaints secondhand, but a few of the boys had told him what they thought of him. Tonight, Wally was feeling an almost desperate need to have fun. Not only was he an outcast at school, but a stiff compromise had set in at home. Dad had always expected a great deal of his kids, but he was usually good-humored about it. Now he joked with Jean and the girls, but around Wally he had become reserved and distant. But that was exactly what Wally didn't want to think about. He was going to prove that he could still work his charm with the girls, even the untouchable Lorraine Gardner, and then he would announce to Mel what he had accomplished. Poor Mel would be in agony. So Wally drove far south of Salt Lake to 39th and State, and he and Lorraine drank malts at the Dewdrop Inn. Then he took her for a ride into the foothills, turned off, and stopped the car. "Wally, come on," Lorraine said. "I don't do this." "Okay, here's the deal. I'll keep my distance, and you keep hugging that door the way you've been doing all night. Or better yet, we could go home." But she didn't seem adamant, and Wally considered that a good sign. "So what are you worried about? Don't you trust me?" "No, I don't. I know what a Romeo you are." Wally could see that he had his work cut out for him. "Lorraine, can we be serious for a minute?" he asked. "No, I don't think so. You're never serious." "I know that's how I seem." Wally leaned forward, took hold of the steering wheel, and put his chin on his hands. "But I do think about serious things." "Then tell me what you want out of life, Wally." Wally thought he heard some sarcasm, but he pushed ahead anyway. "What I picture is a nice house, great kids, and above all, a perfect wife. I see myself sitting by a fire on a winter night, reading a good book, and then I look over at my wife and suddenly go weak all over, just because I love her so much." "That's so nice. I'm glad you can talk to me this way." Wally heard the words he wanted to hear, but the tone was wrong. He folded his arms and looked down. "I know you have no reason to believe any of this, Lorraine. I don't reveal my true self very often. No one really knows me." "Oh, I think the girls at East High do." Wally could see a spark of reflection from her eyes, like fire. "What?" "Gwen Larson and I are good friends, Wally. We talk about everything. You drove her up here, probably to this same spot, and you told her all the same baloney. Then you kissed her, her first kiss, and she floated on air for a week. But that was 3 weeks ago, and since then, you haven't even called her. You really hurt her." "I'll ask her out again sometime. No, you won't. It's just a game you play. You take a girl out until she starts to like you, but once you kiss her, you've won, and you look for another challenge." Wally was surprised. "Hey, talk about playing games. You were just waiting for me to say something that I also happened to say to Gwen, so you could jump all over me." "That's exactly right. And I got you, didn't I?" Wally couldn't think what to say for a moment, but he realized that he was smiling. "Well, yeah." Lorraine laughed, and then leaned back against the door. "You're a sad case, Wally. I really don't like you at all." But her voice had lost its venom. Wally was surprisingly relieved. It was good to have the game finished, even if he had lost. "Lorraine, I didn't mean to hurt Gwen. I didn't think about it that way." "Don't you care about people? Something like that, a first kiss, means a lot to a girl. Didn't you stop to think how she would feel if you never asked her out again?" Wally thought for a few seconds, and then he told the truth. "Not really." "Wally, that is so pathetic." "Maybe so," Wally said. And he found himself wondering about himself. "Honestly, I think there's something wrong with me. Everyone seems to know how I ought to feel about things, but most of the time I don't feel anything at all." It was a strange moment. Wally had never said anything like that before, but the words, as though they had come from someone else, struck him as right. and they seemed to reformulate his entire view of himself. There was something missing in him, he realized, and he didn't know what it was. A lot of boys are like that, Lorraine said. Maybe girls, too, I don't know. So what do I do about it? Grow up, I guess. A frightening sadness had come over Wally, but he wanted to keep talking. I feel like I need to get away from Salt Lake. I'm thinking about joining the service as soon as I graduate. What are you going to do? I don't know. Get married eventually, have kids, wash on Mondays, iron on Tuesdays, all the regular things. But I want to do something else before I commit my whole life to that. Like what? I don't really want to go to college. I'd just like to get a job and earn some money of my own. And then I don't know, maybe take some trips. Wally laughed. So why don't you do it? My parents say that college is the best place to meet a good husband, and I guess that's right. If you ask me, the U is an extension of East High. All the same crowd will be up there. I want a change in my life. What does your dad say about that? I'm not going to let my dad make my decisions for me anymore. Wally felt some dampness on his back, even through his sweater. He sat up. My dad will never be satisfied with anything I do, Lorraine, so why try to please him? Wally, come on, I know your father. There's just no way you're going to convince me that he's a bad guy. Wally didn't say anything. You love your father, don't you? Lorraine asked. It was a simple question, seemingly offered as a reminder more than a query, but Wally was surprised by the confusion it set off. I guess I do, was all he could think to say, but he knew the real answer was too complicated for him to explain. Look, Wally, I need to go home now. Wally hesitated. He knew she was disappointed with his answer, but he couldn't think what to say. Will you go out with me again? He asked. No, Wally, I told you. I don't like you. That's all right, I don't like me either. He tried to laugh, but they both knew that he was telling the truth, and it was an oddly personal, even poignant moment. Don't say that, she said, and she reached out and touched his arm. Wally, you'll be okay. You're just trying to figure yourself out. Most guys our age are doing that. But I'm not finding any answers. Are you really that unhappy? I don't know. I'm not sure what I am. I just feel lost. Oh, Wally. She reached her hand behind his head, rested it on the back of his neck, and then she touched her cheek to his cheek for a moment. You'll be okay, she said. Wally felt a kind of weakness come over him. Will you go out with me? He asked. Wally, I didn't mean it that way. I just feel bad for you. I know. But will you? No. I'll be your friend, that's all. How about next Friday? Will you be my friend that night? She was silent for a long time, and then she said, Okay, but not on a date. We could talk some more if you want. Yeah, I'd like to do that. Chapter 13. Early in June, Wally graduated from high school and took a summer job on Matt Nakashima's farm. Brother Nakashima had called and asked Wally whether he wanted to work for him, and for Wally the chance to get away from the dealership had been welcome. Wally was still thinking about joining the service, but he hadn't confronted his father with the idea yet, and he wasn't quite ready to do so. For one thing, he wanted to keep seeing Lorraine, if at all possible. He found the work in Matt's orchards quite pleasant, and above all he liked Matt, who treated him like a man, not a boy. Wally went to church, but his heart wasn't in it. He grew weary of all the preaching, especially when it was his own father's turn. President Thomas had a way of going on, always harping about the heritage the people in the valley had to live up to. To Wally it was just the same old tune. That summer Wally got drunk with some friends one night, just to see what it was like. After, he decided he wouldn't do it again, and he felt bad that Jean had seen him come in that night. But his family was entirely too strict about things like that. Wally was not falling into a life of corruption, it was just something he had tried for the fun of it, and the family had nothing to worry about. Chapter 14. Wally and Lorraine were lying on their backs watching the fireworks. It's so strange, Lorraine said. Every time there's a flash, it feels like the light is coming right at us. Wally laughed. I know, I love that feeling. It scares me, but I like it too. It's like the sparks are going to keep right on coming and crash on top of us. Wally laughed. Yeah, well, you love to take chances as long as you know there's no real danger. Hey, that's not true. My friends tell me I shouldn't be spending so much time with you. They think you're dangerous. Wally heard the thump as another rocket took off. He could trace the path by the sparks, could hear the hissing sound. Then the burst came, and again he saw the illusion, the expanding blast, the light reaching toward them, as though it were much closer than it really was. In the quiet that followed, Wally asked, "What's so dangerous about me? I haven't even tried to kiss you." And it was true. He had never kissed her, and yet they had been together often all summer. He had, however, held her in his arms, on the dance floor. Wally was a good dancer, and Lorraine had begun to accept invitations that clearly were dates. Mostly they went to Friday night ward dances, but sometimes Wally splurged and they went to the Rainbow Rendezvous downtown, or to the Avalon Ballroom south of Sugar House. Today, the 24th of July, they had gone to the Covered Wagon Days parade in the morning, and then shared a picnic lunch in Liberty Park. They had each gone off to family parties that afternoon and hadn't planned to be together again, but Wally had called and said, "Let's drive out to Lagoon and see the fireworks." He had expected Lorraine to turn him down, but she had agreed. By the time they had gotten to the Lagoon, an amusement park near Farmington, the dance floor was already so crowded they could hardly elbow their way in, but they had danced for a time and then spent some time in the funhouse. "My friends all know you," Lorraine was saying now. "They say you're waiting for your chance to attack me." "That's true. And guess what? Tonight's the night." "Well, at least you warned me." Another little thud sounded, and a rocket shot through the darkness. Wally watched for it, but couldn't pick it up. When it burst, it was something new, a larger explosion, and then several more followed in rapid succession. "Big finish," Lorraine said. And it was. 5 explosions followed one after the other quickly, and then one more, higher, bigger than the rest, in brilliant red. It lit up the whole sky. Wally and Lorraine were lying on the grass not far from the pool. Wally had claimed it was best to watch fireworks lying down. Lorraine had accepted that, but she had also kept her distance. "That's the end," she said now. "I need to get home." "The night is young, my dear. What's the hurry?" "I'd better not be late. My parents weren't very pleased about my taking off again tonight." So the two got up and walked to the parking lot. The band had begun to play again, and Wally hummed along with a new Hoagie Carmichael tune called "I Get Along Without You Very Well." It was a beautiful song, and Wally, on impulse, turned to Lorraine. "Let's dance," he said. She laughed, but she let him take her in his arms, and they danced the rest of the song out among the cars. When the music stopped, he stood close to her with his arm still around her waist. She didn't step away, and so he took his chance. He bent a little, felt his nose touch hers, and then turned his head and kissed her. For 3 or 4 seconds she let it happen, didn't exactly kiss him back, but didn't stop him either. And then she stepped away. "No, Wally, I don't want to do that." "Why? We're just friends." She turned and began to walk toward the car. Wally didn't follow. He said softly, "I love you, Lorraine." She spun around. "Wally, what a stupid thing to say! Don't ever say it again." She turned again and hurried away. Wally had said the words suddenly, but not impulsively. He had thought to tell her every time he had been with her lately. When he caught up, Lorraine was leaning against the car, facing him. "I do love you," he said. Lorraine opened the door and got in, but Wally caught the door before she could close it. "Isn't it obvious?" "I know that you feel something for me," she said, "but it's not love, Wally. I want to marry you." She pulled at the door and he let her close it. Then he walked to the other side and got in. "Wally," she said, "please don't do this." "Lorraine, listen, I've decided to go to the U this fall. I've changed my mind about the Navy. I want to keep dating you, and then I want us to get married." "Wally, I'm not going to talk to you about this. I don't think we better see each other anymore." She rolled her window down. The car was warm inside. "Please, take me home now." Wally wondered why he had said anything. He had known how she would react, but he was tired of feeling this way about her and acting as though he didn't. "Lorraine," he said, "why do you say that? What's wrong with my being in love with you? I've told you from the first, we can only be friends. I'm sorry, but you're not the kind of person I want to marry. You don't know what you want out of life. You just float along with the current. I just told you I'm going to college. I'm signing up this week." "Oh, is that so? And what are you going to major in?" "Business. I've thought all about it. I'm going to have my own business of some kind. And I'll do all the things you want me to. I'll make something of myself." "And what about the church? What about it?" She turned and leaned closer to him. "Wally, you don't care about the church." "You don't know that. I go to church every Sunday." "Wally, you don't get it. I happen to believe in the church. I want a husband who feels the same way." Wally tried to think what he could say to her. He didn't want to claim anything that wasn't true. "Lorraine," he said, "I know I've been mixed up, but I know what I want now. I want you. I'll do good things with my life, so you'll be happy with me." You can't want those things because of me. You have to want them because they really matter to you." Wally didn't know what else to say. He only knew that he woke up every morning thinking about Lorraine, and this summer, working in the orchard all day, he thought about her virtually all the time. He hurried home each night and called her, and hoped that she would want to see him. He longed for moments when she showed even the slightest sign that she cared about him. "Wally, I do like you. I have more fun with you than anyone, but that's just the point. Fun is what you're good at. And dancing. In all the time we've spent together, this is the first time you've said anything about your goals or about the church, and I had to bring those things up. Then why haven't you told me to get lost before now?" Her voice had lost all its irritation when she said, "I like you more than I should. I wish I didn't. Will you keep going out with me?" "Why, Wally?" "Because we like each other. Let's just leave it at that, if that's all you feel for now." "Oh, Wally, it just won't work." "Just keep seeing me. That's all I ask. I won't push you to think about the future." She didn't say yes, but she also didn't say no, and so Wally left it at that, and he drove her home. And as he drove to his own home after, he thought about praying, promising that he would reform himself if he could just have her. But he hadn't prayed for a long time now, and he thought God would consider him a phony if he tried.
This completes the second CD. Please insert CD number 3 to continue with the program.